execution. So this kind of just gives you an idea of what we kind of deal with from the onset of an idea to the very end of the project. So obviously at first, we want to make sure that we have any funds in place that we need. And so like I said, we have employees here at the airport who one of their jobs is to go out and secure funds from the FAA or FDOT to show them that we have need for projects. And so they try and secure funds that way. We'll have a concept design for a project where we work with a consultant to try and develop some, I guess, concepts of something that, and we'll get into examples of like a project, but they'll help us develop the concept. And then at that point, we will go out and obtain the services from an architect engineering firm who will then help us develop the construction plans. And I'm not sure how familiar you guys are, but with those, they'll go with kind of 3 big milestones with a 30, 60, and 90% submittals. And so David and I are involved with just kind of overseeing and reviewing the plans and permitting throughout that whole process, which actually, yeah, that's my next point, is the design, development, and permitting. And then once we've secured a final bid set of plans, they're ready to go to construction. At that point, we advertise the project. We have to put it out there for 30 days. That way, subcontractors or general contractors can be aware of the project coming up, and they will then provide their bids. So they'll review the plans, they'll put together a best cost bid on their part. We open it publicly, and the lowest responsive bidder is who we are obligated to go with because we are a public entity. There's other firms, public or sorry, private firms like the one I used to work at, where if they wanted to provide service to anybody, it was just between them and the owner, and they were able to provide, they were able to charge whatever they wanted. And it was a private project, so that owner could spend the money however they wanted. But because we are working with funds that are obtained through public entities like DOT and FAA, TSA, we have to make sure that we're very transparent and going with the cheapest possible option. So once we've obtained the bids, we'll have our pre-construction value engineering. This kind of goes hand in hand with the design development. It's kind of typically around the end of the design development, we start producing our cost estimate, any value engineering that needs to get done prior to finalizing those plans. Because you want to make sure once you put out those plans that that's it, that's exactly what you want to go to construction with, because changing stuff afterwards becomes a lot more expensive. So that kind of falls in line more with like the design development. And then my favorite part of the project is construction, and you'll see why in a second. I added a picture a little bit later. David actually has a project that just kicked off into construction, so he'll be getting involved with weekly projects at this, or weekly meetings, I'm sorry, with the construction manager and the engineer. So they kind of just oversee the progress every week just to see how it's going out there in the field. Once the project closes out, we receive the as-built drawings, any warranties and manuals, anything like that for us to take over the project, and it becomes our property, which at that point we turn it over to our operations and maintenance department, and they're the ones that operate whatever it is, whether it's the boarding bridges that we replaced or a new road that we built. We then at that point will maintain it, and our finance department will take over asset management, and they kind of keep track. It's money stuff that I don't really get too involved with, but they basically want to know all the assets that we own, whether it's like I said, the boarding bridges. They want to make sure that they've taken into account all those costs all around the airport, and they kind of see the life expectancy of them and kind of figure out when's the next time that we're going to need to replace them or maintain them or have any kind of expenditures related to that. All right, typical project elements. So obviously the biggest part of it is your plan documents, and we don't work with just one engineering field. We have civil, we have electrical, mechanical, structural. So a huge part of the project, depending on whatever it is, could be one field, but you are working with a bunch of different sub-consultants that are working together to produce a set of plan documents. So we get a lot of experience with not just civil, but I mean, I don't know too much electrical besides the intro to electrical class that I had to take at UCF, and then physics 2 was kind of electrical heavy, but now I'm dealing with looking at like panels, and I mean, obviously I don't have to know everything about them, but I have to know enough to manage the project. So you do have to start touching on all these different fields. So it's a pretty cool part of the project. You got your technical specifications. So for every piece of equipment or resource, if it's pavement, all the material that's going into the project, they have to meet a certain specification, and the engineer will typically develop that during the design plan or the design phase. Your general and special conditions. So this is pretty much like your contract with your consultant and your construction manager to make sure that they're doing the job that you hired them on for, and there's certain guidelines that they have to kind of abide by. You have your permit conditions, which depending on what the project is, you could have to go for South Florida Water Management District permit. If you want to get an ERP, it's an environmental resource permit, or if you have to get a permit for a building permit, or let's see, what else? Like electrical permits, utility permits, stuff like that, water usage. So just depending on the project, really, every project that we have is very different, just because, I mean, it's kind of like our own little city here. So one project could be a roadway project. One could be just an electrical project within the airport. So that one would not necessarily need a ERP for. So it just depends on the project, really. Phasing plans only required if you are going to phase the project, obviously, which sometimes due to funding or just constructability, you kind of have to phase the project. So we'll come up with phased plans. And then obviously the safety plans are required for any project. It's a huge part of the engineering and design of the projects to make sure that you build it safely. So we have to produce those for each project as well.
Let me jump into this.
Sure.
Just kind of screw through this. As George is mentioning, South Florida Water Management District, that's a huge permit we have to do with outside projects. We had actually a hazardous wildlife project we completed a few years back, and we definitely had to have a permit for that because they kind of dictate, how much water you can discharge off your property because, it could affect all your neighbors downstream or whatnot. So these permits have all these conditions in them that you have to follow. Or other ones, Florida Fish and Wildlife, we don't really deal a lot with them just because, we own our own land. There are some protected species that might be on property. So if we encounter those, we have to contact them to be removed. Army Corps of Engineers, they're big for wetland, which we do have some wetlands that are not currently developed at the airport. So anytime if we're going to have a project that affects them, like the parallel runway or whatnot, that'll be a huge one that we have to go to Army Corps of Engineers to get approval from. And then any habitat impacts. I mean, we have a huge undeveloped area at RSW, so we'll be impacting a lot of habitat here in the future once we do expand.
Yeah, and actually for the Army Corps, one of our projects that it will be on here later that we'll discuss, we have to go through them because there is wetland impacts, and that's a really difficult permit to have to go through, because where South Florida Management District might be a month or 2 or 3, at times you're looking at over a year of dealing with the Army Corps of Engineers, because uh, just the wetland impacts are a very big thing. We try to mitigate those at times or avoid them altogether, just because you don't want to have to go through permitting with Army Corps of Engineers. But at times you kind of just have to develop the land, uh, and times like that you just have to mitigate and purchase credits or whatever to make up for those impacts to the wetlands.
Yep. These are just the typical permitting agencies you deal with, as discussed. Lee County, that's pretty much our local government. Anytime you have a project, we typically have to get a development order or a limited development order if we're not really impacting any new land or areas. Anything that's a building, like a new tower or a new vault, got to get building department in, because they have to come out and do inspections, make sure you're following all the local codes, jurisdictions. FAA, of course, environmental assessments. There's a bunch of, we call them surfaces, but they're pretty much imaginary surfaces at an airport that, you can't build certain things that can penetrate these surfaces just due to, hazardous things for flying planes and stuff like that. So, drones, they're a big thing nowadays. So, this has been a huge thing in the FAA over the past, 5-6 years, just with drones, people flying them at their house and potentially being in the flight paths of aircraft. So that's a big thing. FDOT, of course, plans review. Every time we finish design of a project, we send it to FDOT, they review it, or they say they review it, just to make sure nothing's on there that we're missing or whatnot. But since they're funding it, they get all the drawings for every project we do. And then DEP, we deal with DEP a lot for FPL relocations of power lines and whatnot. If we have to run power to a new building, always got to contact them, make sure we're not impacting anything that might be protected. So, so typical engineering disciplines, like I said, myself and George were civil. George came from the site civil side of the house before he came to the airport. I came from geotech before I started this job. But yeah, it pretty much includes roads, airfield pavements, utilities, stormwater management, anything that has to do with the site and getting it ready for construction and whatnot. Then you got your building, which is more architectural, similar like our terminal, rental car facility, anything that's vertical pretty much is building. Architectural, of course, as I mentioned, but that can mean landscaping as well. You can't just build a building and just have it be a plain concrete structure. Actually, local code won't allow you to do that. You build something or you take out land, you have to put back so many trees or make it look decent. So yeah, that's why a lot of architectural landscape can get pretty expensive pretty fast, depending on how much land you're affecting. And then environmental, of course, I mentioned the hazardous wildlife project we had going on. That was pretty much just to mitigate not wetlands, but attractants like canals and marshlands to birds at the airport. Of course, birds and planes don't really mix. So that project was really much just to rip wrap some canals and make it difficult for them to land there and want to eat. So that's a big thing at FAA ever since the miracle on the Hudson. So as George mentioned earlier, these are just the kind of typical engineering disciplines we deal with on a daily basis. It's pretty cool. Our job working at an airport, we get to touch on each one of these as opposed to working in the private sector. You just specialize almost, if you do geotechnical, you're pretty much going to be doing geotechnical. You're going to be doing borings, you're going to be doing foundation design, those types of things. Same with structural, you're not doing the site development or anything. You're just strictly design, how much load can this beam or this bridge hold? How much weight does the building need to hold? All those types of things. And then electrical. So yeah, it's pretty cool working at airport. We're pretty well-rounded. We get to work with all these specialties at once, which is really cool. You don't really have to specialize. You get to see every part of the project from beginning to end, which is, I think, the best part about my job. So we just get to see it from, conceptualized all the way through to construction with Where in the private sector, you pretty much design it, move on, get the drawings out, move on to the next project. So it's really cool being on this side of the house.
Did you want to touch on that previous slide still, or are you good?
No, I'm good, man. You
Okay.
can go on this one.
All right. So some of the special considerations that we have to take for our projects, obviously being at an airport, we have a lot of people that live around here. We have, it's a huge security concern. So we have a system in place, the CCTV cameras. I'm not sure exactly how many number of cameras we have, but I'm pretty sure there's not a single spot in the airport. Well, besides the bathrooms, the restrooms are off limits, but um, there's nowhere that you could be where you're not potentially being watched. So we have a very complex CCTV system, even for the roads, the roads around the airport and the fence. It's got a very, I won't get into any detail, but it's got a very sensitive system that makes sure that nobody is getting into an area we're not supposed to be. So we've got the height limitations, like David had mentioned, with FAA permitting. They want to make sure that we're not going and building a 15-story hotel at the end of the runway and potentially cause some sort of safety concern for inbound aircraft. So there's kind of those special concerns they have to keep into mind as we move through projects, and just determining where we want to locate certain things. Noise sensitivity. So actually there's like the guy 2 doors down from me, he takes a lot of calls. That's one of his jobs, is to take the calls from local residents who are just disgruntled about the fact that they have all these airplanes flying over their heads all day. So we want to make sure, obviously, that we don't intentionally go and build a new runway that's going to be taking off right over Gateway. But obviously, to some extent, they already know that they're living near an airport, so it is what it is in that sense. But yeah, other items like stringent tolerances that we have to meet for runway grades. You got your cross slopes and your drainage. They have to make sure that, as far as, I mean, if it's raining, you don't want an airplane that's coming into land to hydroplane and skid off the runway. So there's very tight tolerances. Whereas if you're building a road, say a local road out in Fort Myers, if there's a little dip here and there in the pavement, or there's a storm sewer, if the manhole is slightly high or low and it causes a bump for you, they might be able to get away with stuff like that. Whereas with us, I mean, we're out there. David, I forget what the technique was called that they used that page to kind of profile the pavement. Do you remember?
Profilograph.
What is it?
Profilograph.
Okay, the profilograph.
Yeah.
So yeah, we pretty much have to go through and just make sure that we have very tight tolerances on the pavement, cross slopes, stuff like that.
Yeah. To touch on what George was saying earlier about the noise, just FYI to you guys, whenever y'all first go to buy your first house, just kind of want to look at where you are, maybe at your local airport or whatnot, of where the, departures and landings are happening in that path for aircraft. So
Yep.
don't want to be right overhead. Might get a cheap house that way though. So just keep in mind.
Yeah. Otherwise they'll be calling Tyler and making complaints.
Yeah.
All right. So now